So one of the common criticisms coming from the right wing, from high-profile Republican politicians to the big blogs on the right, was that they didn't focus enough on how in danger we are from the threat of radical Islamic extremist terrorism that's really violent, or whatever they're calling it these days. So Jim Giralty of the National Review said, not one speaker addressed ISIS or Islamist terrorism last night. Democrats formulate their governing plans in a happier, peaceful, imaginary world. Well, it is happier and peaceful because we acknowledge facts like murders are down, violent crime is down, those sorts of things that they refuse to accept. Deaths among police officers massively down from previous administrations. So he's wrong about the imaginary part, but he is right that during the 61 speeches that happened on the first night of the DNC, there were not many references to ISIS, and that has now been picked up. Front page Drudge, no talk about ISIS. And in this video, you're going to see Donald Trump's VP candidate, Mike Pence.
It is extraordinary to think that yesterday in Philadelphia, 61 speakers came to the podium and not one of them named ISIS by name. This man will name our enemies without apology, and he will defeat them.
Notice then that he ranked naming them first before defeating them.
Yeah, naming them by name.
By name.
That's good.
What does that even mean? Like, okay.
It's the whole Mike thing again.
Yeah.
Names. Yeah. It's always been an issue for him.
It's all in a nickname.
By the way, it is a little strange that, terrorism wasn't mentioned at all, but there's a huge difference between the tone of the DNC versus the tone of the RNC. The RNC was about nothing more than fear-mongering. Fear-mongering about minorities, fear-mongering about Black Lives Matter, fear-mongering about Muslims, everything you could imagine. It's all about fear. You should be afraid. You need to elect Trump because he's going to protect you. He's, going to be the one that's going to police all of this bad activity, even though he has no idea how. But keep in mind, it's just the first day of the DNC. Like, not every single night needs to be about ISIS. And another thing I want to mention, look, that's the positive perspective of Hillary Clinton and the DNC. Now, the other perspective is, what would Hillary do differently from what Barack Obama has done when it comes to foreign policy, right? So maybe they don't want to emphasize that because maybe they realize that people aren't too happy with his foreign policy. I have no idea, but they should somehow find a way to mention it because it is an important issue.
Yeah, maybe. Mm-hmm. So, first of all, I know Hillary Clinton's policy in regards to Obama's in foreign policy. She brags about how it is more muscular. And they have leaked stories to the press about, hey, don't worry, we're going to be more muscular than Obama, meaning more hawkish, more bombings, more interventionist. So that's coming. Mm-hmm. She's not going to not talk about that. She's going to talk about that plenty in her own speech, is my guess. And in these next 3 days. It's a perfectly fine point for the Republicans to make. Rhetorically, hey, 61 speakers, no one mentions ISIS. I get it. But if you're actually looking at the real problems in America.
Yes.
One of the things that they mentioned, one of the critics said, oh, she sat there and talked about the economy and people's jobs and health care and their education and didn't even mention ISIS. Yeah, all those things are much more important. And in fact, if you made a real list, and this is in the media, you're not allowed to say this because, because of all the fear mongering and it's unacceptable. In terms of importance to actual American citizens, ISIS is maybe number 198. And in the Republican convention, they mentioned it about 1 billion times.
Yeah, part of this, I think, is the Republicans watching this for one day, and Mike Pence not. How can you not be scaring people? What kind of a convention is this if you're not scaring people? Yeah. Because it's so foreign to them to go into, but Anna's right too, they're going to get to it. And they're going to get to it in a reasoned way. The Republican convention also was defined by the way that they had their schedule and their days set up, and they titled each day. Today was Make America Blank Again, Make America Blank. And they weren't able to even stick with it. Everything was just so haphazard. This was showing more discipline. Last night was not about scaring. It was not about ISIS. It was about beginning the unity thing, which they did, and now they're moving on to other things. They're having the roll call vote tomorrow, Thursday. You'll see. Anna's right.
Yeah, and so I agree with you that not only is it objectively not the most important issue facing America, but even if you just ask Americans what the most important issue is, they don't rank it as most important. So even if she's just being a pragmatic politician, focusing on other issues like the economy and things like that, is a better move to make. The reason that it pisses me off is they're pitching it as they didn't even mention it, but that's not fundamentally what they mean. They think that it should be talked about for the entirety of all the speeches, for all of the nights. They want you not to just realize how scary the world is, but they want you to live in fear, not just for this election, but always. And the problem with that tactic is that at some point, if the incentive for you as a politician is to try to scare the shit out of everybody and make them think about terrorism at all times, then your motivations are not that dissimilar from the terrorists themselves. ISIS doesn't care about killing 10 people in a shooting or blowing up 20 people in an airport. Those are just means to the end of changing the way you live and the way you think every single day. And that's what the Republican Party these days is trying to do. They want our entire world, everything that we are and everything that we do, to be dominated by constant fear of foreign terrorists, which is exactly what ISIS wants. Also, and I know that that's controversial, but they should not be doing the work of terrorists in their rhetoric.
Well, they already have. And there's a great amount of fear in the country right now, and they're exploiting that fear for their own political purposes. But one other thing I wanted to mention is that there seems to be this huge contradiction within the Republican Party right now, because the biggest appeal of Donald Trump is he keeps talking about, we got to look out for us, right? We got to look out for the United States, what Americans want, screw everyone else. But it's interesting because you're right, Cenk. I mean, ISIS has had a very little impact on the United States. I mean, in terms of global terror, there has been an impact in Europe, there has been an impact in the Middle East, but in the United States, we've been pretty much unharmed by it, okay? Of course, there are lone people who have self-radicalized, but why is it that Americans allow that fear of ISIS to play a role in their decisions on who they're going to vote for? If they genuinely care about Americans and taking care of America and making America great again, why didn't Donald Trump focus more on the economy? And I'm talking about specific policy ideas, not, I'm gonna create so many jobs. I'm going to create, that's not a policy idea.
Good jobs.
Okay, so let's just expand on that a little bit. So healthcare, for example, affects... the uninsured were 30 to 40 million or so before we knocked off about 20 million from that number, which is great. So that affects a tremendous number of Americans. Well, whether your kid gets a free education so he's got a shot at being able to be rich and successful or whatever he wants, that affects almost all Americans.
Yeah.
So the economy affects almost all Americans. So in terms of ISIS damage here in the U.S., the guy in Orlando had nothing to do with ISIS. That's not me saying it. That's FBI saying it. He just said right before he killed him, ISIS, I guess. But in fact, he was closeted gay, had gone to that nightclub many times, and the FBI described him as basically the profile of a mass shooter. The guy in San Bernardino did really pledge allegiance to ISIS, does not seem to have had any real communication with him, but I'll count that one. Mm-hmm. And so, okay, one shooting. By the way, we have mass shootings almost every day in the country. So if you cared about that shooting, you would actually care about mass shootings a lot more. Then why didn't they talk about mass shootings all the time? We had how many hundreds of speakers at the RNC, and not one of them brought up mass shootings, which is almost by definition 300 times larger problem than the one San Bernardino shooter here in America.
They had the NRA. They had Chris Cox there talking about mass shootings.
They had a huge ad for the NRA.
Yeah. That's right. They had an ad for the NRA.
Yeah.
So this is not about what actually concerns about America. And by the way, if you want to talk about foreign policy and ISIS having a very real effect in Syria and Iraq and also in Europe, okay, but then Russia has a giant effect in the world, and Trump is basically saying, hey, I'll do whatever they want. Yeah, sure, Putin, you want Estonia, take it. You want Ukraine, take it. Yeah, so why didn't you guys say anything about Putin and how dangerous he is? You had hundreds of speakers to talk about that, and you didn't. Because this isn't about policy. John made the best point. This is about creating terror in the country. And ISIS thinks it is to their advantage to create terror in the world. And Donald Trump's Republican Party believes it is to their advantage to help them create terror in America so that they could use that terror to their political advantage. And it's gross.